Oraxia, the long-awaited spider frame that almost does what a spider can. In this video, I will break down the frame, her kit, and go over the core gameplay loop and of course, the build. Be sure to use the timestamps to go to the appropriate sections of the video. Alright, let's start off with what she is as a whole and if she is the frame for you. First off, she doesn't have a particular specialty as she doesn't fill a particular niche. However, that's not a bad thing. Oraxia is a somewhat awkward jack of all trades. She is a stealth warframe, health tank frame, weapon platform, area denial, debuff frame, and ability DPS. A bloated fourth ability that takes away the feel of her first three abilities. Her fourth ability allows you to be super mobile. Granted, you're not held back by the Warframe's narrow and tight tile sets. However, her second ability incentivizes choke point control, which translates to a partial camping setup. Still not bad, but that also isn't helped when your spider babies keep enemies occupied way off in the distance, which can disrupt enemy spawns. That's if you can easily maintain their duration. Now this is really apparent in particular tile sets. She suffers in a majority of Warframe tile sets due to them being very small and narrow. And she has a very massive hitbox, which can get her stuck in specific terrain and even doors.
Let's get out of here. Holy sh! I'm stuck. Holy crap. So yeah, this is trying to maneuver. I can't. Out of range? What do you mean? Oh my god. What the f?
Her best tile sets are of course the Streets of 1999, the Void, Lua, and parts of the Gas City. Everywhere else is absolute pain. I knew this would be an issue when every preview of Oraxia was shown in open tile sets, where she had amazing freedom to move around without obscure collision. That being said, let's move on with her kit. Her passive grants her invisibility for 8 seconds when wall latched. This duration cannot be increased, although refreshed when wall latching yet again. And because of her invisibility, she can take full advantage of Arcane Crepuscule. However, it can be very inconsistent to maintain this arcane because of tile sets. Mercy's Kiss, her first ability, is a pounce that deals toxin damage, and if it kills enemies, they drop energy and health orbs. However, if the target is at 50% health or lower, Mercy Kiss can execute them. The threshold execution does not work on high-value targets, like Acolytes or Corrupted Vor. Very disappointing.
Wait! That Acolyte was 50% HP and he didn't get one shot? Lies!
You can easily tell if an enemy is ready for an execution by the marker on their heads or just by looking at their health bar. The damage and orb drop scales off strength. Note that you will receive more health orbs than energy. So this will synergize really well with Equilibrium, and she's a frame that can easily run negative efficiency and not even worry about energy loss. Webbed Embrace, her second ability, is a deployable web sack that splatters on impact and lays out a web that catches anything that enters its zone. Upon entering, enemies get toxin procced, although as the web sack initially expands, it will trap enemies in a cocoon, and cocooned enemies are vulnerable to incoming damage. You can have a total of 3 web sacks on the field at a time, and this is her subsume. Widow's Brood. Oraxia hurls poison darts at enemies that deal and apply toxin and impact. Any toxin-affected enemy that dies will spawn scuttlers, aka spider babies. These spiderlings will scale with the enemy level, and how long they last is dependent on your duration. However, you can extend the duration by killing enemies from other sources of toxin, from the spiderlings' damage themselves, or from your fourth ability. These spider babies will deal and proc toxin and impact, and can also be buffed with Nourish, Summoner's Wrath, Arcane Camisado, and of course, Theorem Infection. Now, if you haven't heard of that arcane, I don't blame you. Now onto the final ability, Silken Stride. She deploys her 4 back legs and gains additional functions. In this form, you no longer dodge roll, but web swing. Even though you can't dodge roll, it still triggers mods like Rolling Guard. This web swing allows you to wall latch to any wall and ceiling indefinitely. However, the most disappointing thing about this is you cannot wall run or crawl, hurting the whole spider theme. So you're just stuck there on the wall unless you swing to another surface. And swinging from wall to ceiling still counts as a wall latch that triggers your passive. You're pretty much playing the floor is lava to maintain her invisibility. In this form, you gain a health increase multiplier, which scales with strength. You're also immune to status effects, but you can still get one shot from toxin damage. The irony. Note that damage and statuses are two different things. Your range weapons gain additional toxin damage. This damage bonus is a coating on your weapons, similar to Site 09's elemental damage buff. You can tell you have this buff with the toxin elemental damage indicated on your magazine. The elemental damage bonus does not combine with your modded elements. The reason only buffs ranged weapons because she loses all melee functionality in this form and instead casts the first ability if you decide to tap the melee button. If you kill enemies in this form, they explode in a Toxin Nova burst. This extends the Scuttler's spawning window. This ability drains energy over time, so to sustain yourself, use the execution to give you a burst of energy.
Also, I did notice when you perform an execution, you do this Nova Burst that also blinds enemies. So boom, we do this radial blind type of effect.
Alright, now that you know how she works and what she's all about, let's go into the gameplay loop and build portion. Alright, so let's take a look at this Oraxia build. First off, I'm showcasing a non-Helminth build. As you can see right here, we're using her core abilities. And for the Archon Shards, I have 4 red Tauforge Shards for duration. This is mainly here for balancing. Surprisingly, not casting speed. I previously did have casting speed, then I noticed I didn't really need to use casting speed that much because I was just activating my buffs, using her as a somewhat weapon platform, and just applying Toxin with my Widow's Brood and having my little babies kill the enemies. And if I wanted energy, I would just pounce on enemies. So I wasn't really spamming my abilities as much. And finally, the Green Shard. This increases my max corrosive stacks. Instead of 10, I will have 13. You need 14 for a full strip, and we don't need to fully strip here. So this is a great way to balance your setup. As you can see on my stats, I have 212% duration without narrow-minded, 175% range with just one range mod, and a balance of 279 strength. My strength will get higher and higher if I activate my abilities. You can see on the top right, I'm using Arcane Bellicose. Gain ability strength based on your health. Right now I have 16%. But remember, if I activate my 4th ability, I gain a strength increase. You need a total of 3,000 health to fully stack this Arcane. As you can see, 72% strength, and of course, I do have Molt Augmented. The more you build up Molt Augmented, and of course, having the Sling Strength, you can initially start out with 68% strength with Bellicose. But if you further build up your Molt Augmented, you'll have a permanent strength increase, and you can reactivate your 4th to fully buff Bellicose, and for your 4th ability to get a larger damage bonus. So every shot that we deal will proc Toxin right there. Look how fast we stack up our Toxin. And you notice when we kill enemies, we do that Nova Burst of Toxin. Boom. Unfortunately, that Nova Burst does not scale with range. And because we're dealing toxin damage with our weapons, we can take full advantage of the Primary Blight Arcane to give us crit damage and multi-shot. And those thinking about running the Sobek for the Giga Explosion, you can do that. Now for the gameplay loop. I'm using the Madurai Focus School, so 2 Void Slings, 1, 2. I get the Sling Strength bonus. This gives me 40% strength, and when I activate any ability, it will snapshot that strength into it. Now with my initial cast, I have 68% on Bellicose. And the more I kill, I build up Molt Augmented, and I can get a full stack on Bellicose to give me that 72% strength. Have a look at my energy draining over time, and I can swing around and maintain my invisibility as long as there's walls and ceilings to latch onto. So when you're engaging enemies, make sure you're invisible, deploy your web sack, and they're of course cocooned and they'll take more damage. And this is from all sources. You can apply your poison darts and just kill them. And when you kill them while they're affected by their venom darts, it will spawn little babies. There you go. And your babies will, of course, deal more damage to enemies if they're cocooned, and thanks to Summoner's Wrath. Unfortunately, you cannot run Roar with Oraxia's 4th ability. This is her best ability, and you always want to be in this form. However, if you want to use something like Roar, you have to replace the 4th ability. There is an actual good Helminth for her that affects her babies and also supplies you with energy. And who would have guessed it's the 2nd best Helminth used in the game. Ooh. What this does is, of course, give you a viral elemental damage multiplier on your weapons, which also can be used on your allies. So your little spider babies get the viral damage bonus. So they will end up dealing toxin, impact, and viral. And the other good part is this is an energy multiplier. So it's a great substitute to your first ability, so you don't have to pounce on enemies. So now I buff them with Nourish. They're dealing viral. See? Viral. Boom. And you may have noticed I'm also proccing corrosive. That's because of Archon continuity, which will apply a corrosive stack if you apply a toxin proc. Now let's go over the mods. Looking at the base, we have 160% duration thanks to my 4 red Archon Shards. For the arcanes, you can run Kamisado if you want. This will give you increased strength, but also makes your summons move faster. Unfortunately, not attack faster. Now, the reason I am not using this is because it's quite inconsistent. To have an upkeep on this, you do have to rely on your minions to always keep attacking. But I want a consistent strength increase, so instead of running Kamisado, I'll be running Molt Augmented. Kill 250 enemies, boom, you have 60% strength indefinitely. Unfortunately, you do lose the movement speed on your companions. And the other amazing arcane for this setup is Arcane Bellicose. You gain strength based off your health, which caps out to a maximum of 72% strength at 3000 health. Easily achieved thanks to her 4th ability, because when you activate your 4th ability, you have a health multiplier. So as you can see right now, 16% on Bellicose. If I perform a little Void Sling, activate my 4th, I get a 41% increase in strength with no mods. For the aura, I did not put an Omniforma because, well, we pretty much have 2 choices. If you want an increase to your strength, you can go with Growing Power. However, if you want your babies to do more damage, you have Summoner's Wrath. Summoner's Wrath buffs your companion's damage by 75%. Now, this 75% damage bonus is pretty much a roar for your companions, and it is additive to roar. Yes, it's a faction multiplier for your little babies. And because she gains status immunity in her 4th ability, there was no need to run the best mod in the game. So we have 2 choices. We can either run Preparation to give us that 100% maximum energy at spawn, or Power Drift for the 15% increase in strength. And now we can add even more strength to this build. Starting off with Blind Rage. That's exactly how you pronounce it. Trust me, I know. This gives you 99% increase to your strength and reduces your efficiency. And because we have crazy amounts of energy income thanks to the 1st ability, that efficiency is not even noticeable. And to add on to that strength, again, let's put Transient Fortitude. This also buffs my strength, but also takes away some of my duration. And thanks to the Archon Shards, I already have 133% duration, so I don't lose as much. And because her abilities do Toxin, and we want some duration, this is a perfect time to use Archon Continuity. Abilities that inflict Toxin will also apply Corrosive. This is not corrosive damage, this is just the corrosive status effect, meaning it reduces the enemy armor if you deal Toxin. That's about it. If you want a more balanced out strength for all your abilities, you can run with Umbral Intensify. However, if you want to focus more on your 4th ability's damage and giving you more health, you can always run Precision Intensify. But again, this is my final strength mod. However, my strength will be reduced by 40% because I want to increase my range. I'll be running Overextended. Overextended does reduce your strength but gives you range. I'll be running a rank 4 one because I don't want to reduce my strength that much, so it'll be at 279% strength, but we have all these other strength increases plus my focus school. This is the equivalent of putting a stretch and augur reach together. And now we have 3 dash polarities. Prime Flow for the large energy pool, Equilibrium for the orb conversion, which synergizes really well with her 1st ability. Now the final slot here is pretty much a flex slot, but I decided to go with more duration. And the 2 duration mods that fit here are Augur Message or Constitution. Now there is no notable difference when it comes to duration between these 2 mods. However, Augur Message will benefit you more because it will convert energy spent to shields. So not only will you have insane amounts of health, but you will also gain additional shields. we can stack these shields up to like 1,000. Look, it's still going. We're at 1,200 shields. So that's how it's going to be way more beneficial than running Constitution. So she's pretty tanky with the shields and health, and she has invisibility. And if you want to do the Helminth version, boom, same build. All I did was put Nourish. And that's about it. And when it comes to your guns, you can pretty much use whatever you want. For this, I like to use Mycedo with the alternate fire. The build is very simple. We got Primary Blight here. This will grant us additional crit damage and multi-shot if we apply the Toxin status effect with our weapon. And that's easily done thanks to Oraxia's 4th ability. Our base damage, multi-shot, crit chance, crit damage, corrosive, shotgun elementalist, and shotgun barrage. And of course, for my companion, I'll be using the Panzer Volpaphyla. This bad boy right here is going to be perfect for Oraxia, as he's able to spread viral and increase your overall damage. We're going to be running Link Vitality here because this will link with your Warframe's health. So the more she increases her health, the tankier your Panzer becomes. And we're just running with Calculated Redirection and not with Link Redirection because she doesn't have that many shields. We have the skill issue here, so if you do die, and Panzer Devolution for its own skill issue. And we also have Synthetic Strung for even more health orb droppage. So enemies injured by the companion, so they just have to spooge their viral. This will count as an assist, so they will drop more health orbs. Tenacious Bond for some additional crit damage. Bite here buffs Tenacious Bond, so you can always have that crit damage bonus. And the elemental damage and everything else. Alright folks, that has been it from me. I do hope you enjoyed and learned something from this Oraxia build video. If you did, please feel free to leave a like, share, and subscribe for more Warframe content, streams, and so much more. Do it for the description. Thanks for watching, and as always, a peace. Bye-bye now.